好的，各位同学朋友们，大家好，晚上好，下午好，或者是早上好。我们在世界各地不同的地方的同学们，大家自己对号入座了。那再一次感谢大家来到我们的厚仁 JobUpper 职业发展讲座资深专家面对面的系列。还记得我们的目标是希望发掘每一个同学的自我潜力，稳步编织大家的职业生涯，让每一个同学的 talent 和你们的 passion 能够跟现在市场上的 opportunity 能够最好的去结合。那么在我们开始今天的讲座之前呢，首先我想先给大家介绍一个非常难得的在法律界别方面的一个实习机会，那它也是非常 time sensitive 的，稍后呢，请大家跟我们去联系，然后来了解这个职位机会的详情。那么提供这个机会的呢，是我们在中国，特别是中国的西南地区的一个领军国际业务的中国律所，那他们呢也是率先几个进入美国市场的律所之一，他们在华盛顿的分所提供给我们一个 legal intern 的一个职位。那么我们在这里呢，也把基本的要求也列在了这里。这个职位可以是大家在寒假的时候去进行，如果说做得好的话呢，我们也可以在寒假之后通过 part time 的这个形式去继续的支持，或者是一直延续到之后暑假，这对大家来说是非常难能可贵的一个开启在美国的这个真的跟法律相关的一个很好的一个机会，并且呢，它是在离 The Hills 不远的地方，是一个非常好的一个 location。那么，请大家尽快的去跟我们联系来了解这个机会。那么今天呢，我们要请到的这位导师，那可是真的牛了，是这个哈佛、纽约的这个双料高材生，他的职位经历也非常的丰富，在 Macy's， 在很多美国的知名的企业曾经担任过重要的职务，然后之后呢，他又进入了这个法律的这个领域。大家都知道，在美国法律是最贵也最困难的一个行业。那么现在呢，Shaunna 她这个在美国一家非常知名的战略咨询公司担任高级战略顾问，并且为企业和私人的企业呢去提供很多在法律、在这个 compliance 和未来的策略方面的很多的这个指导的经验。那么首先就非常非常的开心，请到 Shaunna。Okay, Shaunna, thank you so very much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me today.
You look great today.
I appreciate that, as do you.
Thanks. So yeah, I have shared a little bit about yourself with our participants, and I'll pass that on to you to talk about the career opportunities in the field of law and legal services. Why don't we start with your education experience? Because I mean, you have such stunning experience that everybody envies, from Harvard to NYU. So we definitely want to know more about that. How did you get there?
Absolutely. Well, I am really grateful for the fact that I had the opportunity to go to such premier institutions. I did my undergraduate degree at Harvard College. I got a Bachelor's of Arts with honors in English and American literature. English and American literature is it's a major that you might find in a lot of American colleges. It essentially is comprised of learning how to read text, analyze it, and write. So I did a lot of analyzing and writing in college, which actually led me to do very well in law school, because law school is comprised of a lot of reading dense text. Of course, it's not fiction like I was studying in college, but analyzing it and writing it. I am from the south of the United States, a place called New Orleans, which is known for food and jazz. And so it didn't necessarily look like I would go all the way to the Northeast for college. However, I had wonderful college counselors in high school, and they encouraged me to apply to schools across the nation. I applied to schools everywhere from the West Coast and was fortunate to be granted admission to places like Stanford and Georgetown and Duke. Ultimately, I chose Harvard College for three very specific reasons. First of all, I was awarded some scholarship money. And as we'll talk about later on when we talk about law schools, US colleges and universities are very expensive. So if you have the opportunity to go to a good school that fits with the area that you want to pursue, and there's a way to make it more affordable, definitely that should be a consideration. Also, at the time when I was 18, I didn't know the type of career that I wanted. So I was very careful to choose a school that allowed me to study a lot of different fields and was well respected in a number of fields. There are colleges and universities that, for instance, are really great for engineering. And for instance, Georgia Tech. It's a wonderful school if you want to be an electrical engineer, chemical engineer. However, if you enter into that school and then ultimately you find that you do not want to become an engineer, it may not be the exact right place if you would like to be, for instance, a philosopher. So that's what I was thinking of when I went to Harvard. And the other thing is, I knew that in order to be competitive, I would have to have a lot of different types of activities on my resume, right? It's not only about what you do in the classroom, but in particular in the US, it's about extracurricular activities. And Harvard College had a lot of extracurricular activities that I knew would appeal to me, things like college government. And so ultimately, that's why I decided to go to Harvard College. As we'll talk a little bit more, I took some time in between college and law school to work. However, I applied to law school in my senior year of college. And ultimately, I decided to go to NYU for much the same reasons that I decided to go to Harvard undergrad. I was fortunate enough to apply and be granted a partial scholarship. And if anything, law school is even more expensive than undergrad. I wasn't quite sure of the type of law I wanted to practice. And NYU is well known for both business law, private practice law, as well as public interest law. We'll get into that a little bit later. And so I knew that I would have options if I went to NYU. And also, it's in a great city. It's in New York. And so that's why I ultimately made the decision to go to NYU Law. And I have to say, I am so pleased by the opportunities that I've been afforded because I went to Harvard undergrad and NYU Law.
That's definitely very impressive. And I mean, when we were talking to each other, you told me that you applied for many law schools, and many of them are among what we call T14, which is the top US law schools. And it is so impressive that you almost got all the admissions.
Absolutely.
You must be very familiar with those schools. Could you share with us a little bit about the landscape?
Absolutely. So I apologize for the phone ringing in the back. So I was fortunate enough to apply to the vast majority of the top 14 law schools and actually be granted admission to most of them. And I will be candid, a lot of the reasons were not only did I have a good GPA, but I'll be honest, not a great GPA, but a good GPA. However, my standardized test scores, the LSAT scores, which is the test that you have to take for admission into US law schools, was very, very high. And law schools, unlike other types of graduate schools in the US, are very, very heavily weighted to statistics. So what your GPA is, what your LSAT is, the types of classes that you took in undergrad, which is really why I think I did so well in that process. So in order to just be transparent for people, I applied to Stanford, got in Texas. UT is the only school that outright rejected me. I still remember that. Got into Northwestern, applied to Georgetown, got in, applied to Duke, got in, applied to NYU, obviously got in, applied to Columbia, got in, applied to Yale, got in, applied to Harvard, got waitlisted at Harvard, but ultimately knew that I wanted to go to NYU. So I took my name off that list because I think it's right to, release those spots for other people. I think the important thing to recognize when you're looking at these top 14 law schools is that while they are all stellar schools, they all might be a little bit better in one subject or another. So for instance, when you look at Yale, for instance, Yale is an incredible school. At the same time, its curriculum is a little bit more slanted to academia. The people that go to Yale go into being professors, researchers, the highest echelon of legal scholars. That might not necessarily be the way you want to go. When you look at Stanford, for instance, Stanford is obviously a great law school. However, many of the big East Coast law firms don't necessarily spend a lot of time recruiting at Stanford, which means that if you go to Stanford and you want to work on the East Coast, you might have to be a little bit more proactive in finding an employer on the East Coast. And so I think there are these things that you have to take into account. And another thing that I think is important, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again in our time together, is just because these are the top 14 law schools does not mean that there are not other great law schools out there. And there might be very, very good reasons for you to go to those schools. Affordability is a huge factor. If you can go to a school that is affordable, that is still well respected, that still allows you to have career opportunities, that is something very, very important to consider. Also, there are certain regions, like if you work in Florida, you might come across the vast majority of the lawyers that you're dealing with, whether they're working beside you or opposing, they might have gone to University of Miami, which is a good law school. And actually there, regionally, you might find that you have a better network than if you went to Northwestern, for instance, because so many people have come out of that school. Where I am from, New Orleans, for instance, Tulane is the premier law school. So what you find is that at the big New Orleans firms and the big Louisiana firms, you're more likely to get through the door as a Tulane graduate than perhaps you would be if you had gone to Duke, because people have an affinity for their school. So you have to not only think about the top 14, which is great if you can get in those schools and it's the right choice, but also if you know you want to study something specific or you want to work somewhere specific, then you should also take that into account.
Thank you very much. 刚刚呢，就是 Shaunna 也跟我们分享了很多非常好的选择学校的一些方案。他刚刚首先讲到了，我们在这个学业里面非常重视，你其实真正的一些硬的指标的统计。那也就是说，大家在本科的时候，在申请之前就要很好的去了解这个law school 申请的一些指标，然后呢，踏踏实实的去把这些指标来做一个很好的一个达到，这样子会得到一个更好的结果。那他也给我们介绍了这14个学校的分布，以及我们可以考虑的学校的不同的专长、位置的因素，然后奖学金以及其他的我们所谓的其实 second tier 但是也非常好的一些学校，我们都应该把它放入到这个考虑的范围之内。Thank you very much, Shaunna. So, well, let's talk about your internship and your career path a little bit, because we see you didn't necessarily start with the law-related career. So how did you actually end up in where you are right now?
Absolutely. So I'm pretty fortunate in that my parents made it very clear that they thought the best way to gain an advantage in looking for a job after college is if you have something on your resume that demonstrates you already have some experience. So I applied to many, many different in-college internship programs, anything that I could find out there, because I knew I wanted to work in some type of business. And I also knew it would probably be advantageous to work for brands and names that people recognized. So during college, I had internships at Macy's, Leo Burnett, which is a huge advertising agency, The Gap, which is the big clothing brand that owns Gap, Banana Republic, and Old Navy. And then Gap, I should say. That was a job after college, and I worked there for a year in finance. And then even after that job at Gap, right before law school, I worked at Pfizer, the big pharmaceutical company, in marketing. What I think is important to note is that these internships had nothing to do with the law. And in a way, that's okay. What employers and what law schools want to see is that you can have a professional job, you can take some responsibility, you can gain some skills, and then you can bring that to your next opportunity. So if you have the opportunity to work for a company, but it's not necessarily exactly what you want to do later, take the internship anyway. I cannot stress that enough. It's more important in a way to have experience on your resume than to wait for it to be the perfect internship. And the other thing is, it's okay if your internships aren't in, brands that are as recognizable as these. The most important thing is to make sure that anytime you are not in school, you are somehow gaining experience. Because that is what law schools and employers are looking for. They're looking for the fact that you are always trying to professionally and personally develop. So think of your resume and your career path like an unbroken line. You always want to make sure you are filling something in. So that's kind of the story with the internships. And I have to say, when I was in law school and I was interviewing for internships at law firms, they always kept coming back to the fact that I had worked with big businesses. Because if you're going to go to a private law firm, their clients are big businesses, and they want lawyers with business sense. So it intrigues not only law firms, but also their clients to see that you've been inside a business and you understand how it works. You understand what's important to a business. You understand how decisions are made and that you have commercial sense. So I always recommend, if you can, get the internship in a business, particularly if you want to be a private law firm lawyer.
Cool. 刚刚 Shaunna 也讲到了这个非常重要的一点，是我们很多的 mentor 都在不断的强调的，那就是不积跬步，无以至千里。不要觉得不是一个 law firm 我就不去，不是一个最大的企业我就不去，而是就像他讲的，你要不断的有经历呈现出来，然后能够呈现给你未来的雇主，告诉他们你是有职业化的素养，你是有能力，你是有团队的合作的精神，然后你可以很好的去进入下一份你的职业。所以这一点Shaunna 也是在不断的提醒大家，一定要注意的是，开启自己的职业生涯，只要有实习的机会，你认为他是能学到东西的，你就要很快的去把握它。
So should we turn to my career path after law school?
Yeah, definitely.
Wonderful. So after law school, well, I should say right before my third year of law school, I did an internship at Wilkie Farr & Gallagher. It's very common in the US law schools to work for a firm, if you're going to go that route, before you graduate, and then you go back to that same firm. It's basically like a summer-long job interview, and you prove yourself, and then you go back. So I went back to the same law firm, Wilkie Farr & Gallagher. It's an international law firm. We had offices, or they still have rather, offices in the US, in New York, in DC, in Houston, also in Europe. So I was an associate there for 8 years, and then I was promoted to partner, and I was a partner for 4 years. So I was there a total of almost 13 years. After that, I decided that I wanted to try to do something a little bit different. So I joined the consulting firm where I work now, Laurel Strategies, which is a DC-based consulting firm. And we actually work with many of the same types of clients that I worked with at the law firm, which is why the skills are transferable. We work with private equity funds. We work with large insurers. We work with consumer-facing brands. And we offer them strategic advice, communications advice, crisis management advice. So as you can see, your career, it's not going to be one thing and then it's going to stop. You know, particularly as people are living longer and working longer, you should think about how each step in your career can build upon the other, and what skills you can take from, say, this 10-year block and move it to the next 10-year block. It's very, very uncommon now, I think, for people to work at the same firm and do the same thing for 20, 30 years. That used to be very common, and it's becoming much less common. So that's something to keep in mind when you're charting your career path.
Cool. So Shaunna, let's dig a little bit deeper into the field of law school and related careers. We
Sure.
hear a lot of jargon like LLM, JD, JSD. Could you start with telling us more about all those?
Absolutely. So why don't we start in the US, even though it's not listed in this order, and then we'll expand. In the US, what you will usually hear people refer to as a JD, which is a Doctor of Jurisprudence. I have a JD. It is the degree given by US law schools. You have to have a bachelor's degree to go to law school in the US and get a JD. You also have to do the LSAT, which is a standardized test, which I mentioned at the beginning. And there are scores of preparation, companies out there, et cetera, that kind of help you do well on the LSAT, the same way there is for, I'm sure you guys have heard of the SAT. It's 3 years full-time. You go basically on the same calendar as you would an American undergraduate course of study, so fall through spring. And then after you get your JD, and this is important, you can't just start practicing law in the US. You have to sit for a state bar exam, which is basically a test over 2 days where you demonstrate that you are skilled enough to practice. And you earn your license to practice state by state. So that's another important thing to keep in mind. The other thing that you'll also hear in the US and you'll come across is an LLM. You often find that international lawyers come to the US and they get LLMs. An LLM is a master of law. You cannot get an LLM in the US unless you have a first degree already in the law, which means you've probably earned a law degree of some form in another country, maybe your native country or somewhere else you've been studying. You do not have to take the LSAT for admission. It's usually 1 year of full-time study, or there's 2 years of part-time study. You may also find that there are LLM programs that are specialized. So for instance, NYU has a great LLM and tax program. So we found a lot of the international students coming to NYU to get a supplemental degree to basically be qualified to basically practice tax law. And it's one of the premier tax law programs in the country. An LLM will allow you to sit for certain state bar exams, but not every state. And that's very, very important to know. So for instance, you can sit for the bar exam in New York, you can sit for the bar exam in California, but you really should check that out, because if your goal is to get an LLM so you can practice in, for instance, Montana, you have to check before you go through the time and the expense of, applying for the LLM to see if that's actually something that can happen. So that's a huge thing you should pay attention to. So those are the 2 main degrees you'll encounter in the US. However, there are other degrees out there. One of them is the Doctor of Juridical Science. So it sounds a lot like a JD, but it's not really to practice law. This is more to be a legal scholar. So you basically are a research doctor in law. you're not learning clinical practice skills, like how to necessarily deal with clients, how to argue in court. You're learning more legal theory. For instance, if you wanted to be someone who writes some of the treatises on the law that are used in a JD program, then being a doctor of juridical science would be like the type of degree you would pursue. However, to go for that degree, you have to be pretty clear that you only want to do kind of research and academia, because your options are more limited. For instance, you can get a JD degree, a doctor of jurisprudence degree, and still become a professor or a legal scholar. You cannot get a doctor of juridical science and then become a lawyer that practices in court. So another thing to watch out for. And then the other degree at the top, LLB, the Bachelor of Laws, this is an undergraduate degree law in Japan and most common law jurisdictions. It is not a degree that is given by US schools or Canadian schools, so it's not a degree that you can get here. It may be a degree that you get in another place and then come here and get an LLM. It really is, it's not so common anymore. You may still run across it, however.
Cool. So when we talk about the career paths of law field, we often think about going to a private law firm or be maybe judicial clerk, but it's definitely more than that. Could you help us map that career path?
Absolutely. So one of the things about law school that makes it a good choice is that there are a lot of different options. You are not necessarily required to practice law just because you went to law school. And in fact, not 100% of my class at NYU went to practice law. So there's the obvious that I've talked about in my career path and that Rowena just mentioned, big law firms or even smaller law firms or even setting up your own practice, although I wouldn't necessarily encourage anyone fresh out of law school to do that. It could be a little daunting. You could also go to a company and work for their general counsel, which is like their head lawyer, because big companies have a lot of legal issues. They don't always want to pay an outside law firm, so they hire their own lawyers. That could be something interesting. Now, companies typically don't hire for every field of law. They typically hire for issues that come up a lot in their business. So like employment law, so dealing with their employees, general corporate law, litigation, if they're the type of business that has a lot of litigation that goes on, tax, because everybody has to deal with taxes no matter where you are, or real estate. For instance, if they are a restaurant, like a restaurant chain operator, and they have a lot of real estate issues that come up, they'll definitely have in-house real estate lawyers. So that's, a path you could go to. And let's skip over non-law for a second. Let's talk about public interest. So public interest law here in the US is you're still getting paid, but typically you are working for nonprofits that may provide legal services. One you guys have probably all heard of is the ACLU that takes on big litigation about civil rights, for instance, or even there are nonprofits basically in every large city that help people deal with renters type issues, like when they're trying to be evicted, or even for children, let's say, that have guardianship issues. All of these are like nonprofit type legal services that you could work for. A couple of different things about nonprofits. Interestingly enough, those jobs are fairly difficult to get. And the reason they're fairly difficult to get is because there aren't that many of them. The people that work in them are typically very passionate and don't move on very often. And the other thing is there's not a lot of funding for them. So these agencies are particularly like very short-staffed, difficult to get them, and they're not particularly lucrative, particularly as law school is very expensive and you have to consider paying back loans or tuition, etc. Public interest jobs typically do not pay very well. You can also work for government agencies. So that's a public defender or a prosecutor. If any of you have ever seen Law and Order, Jack McCoy, when he stands up, boop, boop, he is a prosecutor. And so that is in the public interest. He works for basically the city. I know he's a fictional character, but he works for the city. And so that is definitely a very prestigious job out of law school. It's very difficult to work for a district attorney's office. And frankly, some government agencies would prefer for you to go to a firm first and get your training and then apply. So they prefer to hire you 2, 3, 4 years out of law school as opposed to fresh out, because they don't have the resource or the time or enough people to train young lawyers. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then you also have big nonprofit impact litigation. So actually the ACLU falls in there. I'm sure you guys may have run across things like the Innocence Project that take on cases for people who have been unfairly imprisoned. Those types of jobs, extremely, extremely rare. They really don't happen fresh out of law school. But when you're thinking about your career path, that may be something that you want to ultimately get to, which means you might like to go to a firm that does litigation where you can get a lot of experience and then apply. Something to think about. Judicial clerkships, and Rowena, tell me if I'm going too fast. Judicial clerkships, as you mentioned, those are definitely options out of law school. They are also not as lucrative as going to a firm. However, you get incredible experience because you work side by side with a judge, either a state judge or a federal judge. The federal judge clerkships are more difficult to get. They're more prestigious. You, however, read and write all day long. You do not talk to clients. It's you and the judge, research, writing, analysis. Now, you may be reading briefs from 2 different companies in a litigation, but you're not really talking to them. So if you are not the type of person who wants to sit all day and just like narrowly dive deep into issues, a judicial clerkship may not be the best route for you because it's going to be a very paper-heavy, rather introverted type position. And that's something to note as well. Let's talk about the non-law though, because I think that's interesting. It is by far more common to come out of law school and go into a legal job, whether that be judicial clerkship, public interest, private practice. However, there are opportunities in the non-legal field, specifically consulting, finance, legal technology. I would say for finance, and this would be something like investment banking or going to private equity or venture capital, if that's something you want to pursue outside of law school, your undergraduate degree probably needs to be in finance, because those types of employers are going to look at a legal degree and say, we have a lot of applicants that have business degrees. Why should we overlook them to hire someone who's gone to law school? So you're going to have a pretty good story, and you're going to have skills that are demonstrated on your resume that say, I can handle the finance side of it. But you can certainly go that route. I just want to caution everybody, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Consulting, probably a little bit easier, because consulting is about strategy, finding the problem, coming up with a solution, analysis, which are all things that you were taught in law school. So as I said, less common out of law school, but probably more achievable than going into finance. And then there's a new area that's kind of burgeoning. It's not legal, but there are a lot of opportunities in it, and it's probably going to become even bigger in the future. And that is legal tech, legal technology. As technology changes every industry, it's also changing the legal industry, just slower than other industries. But even right now, when you have big litigations, you no longer have junior lawyers that are looking through every document. Some of those documents are scanned by computers. They're using AI. Some of it's being outsourced to lawyers in other countries. That is all legal tech. And those legal tech companies need lawyers in a variety of ways. They need lawyers to train the people that are writing the code. What are they supposed to be looking for? They need lawyers to explain their product to their legal clients. They need lawyers to think about the next wave of products. So if you want a law school degree and you want that legal background, but you are intrigued by the technology side of it and you don't necessarily want to practice law, I encourage people to take a look at legal tech, because it's going to only have more opportunities in the future. If anything, I would say that's the wave of the future. All right. So these are just some major areas of law practice. It's by no means exhaustive. There are, I'm sure, other areas out there, but these are the largest ones that you will run across. A few that I just want to call out because I think they're important. Business law. If you ultimately want to have the most flexibility, I would highly recommend focusing on business law, because it gives you the ability to work in a law firm, gives you the ability to work in a company as well. Intellectual property law is always going to be of use because companies want to protect their intellectual property. And in fact, as we start to have more IP, as more technology is created, that will only become more important. So definitely focus on that. For all of you, international law as well. As companies are multinational and they have a lot of different subsidiaries and they have to think about the ramifications of having operations all over the world, people that are skilled in international law and the resolution of inter-country conflicts will only be more in demand. So I would think that all of you might want to take a look at international law. And I would also say I was a bankruptcy lawyer as well, but for big companies, so like billion-dollar liquidations. For better or worse, there will always be financial crises out there. So bankruptcy law, I have to put in a little bit of a shout out. And then the last one, tax law. Tax lawyers are always in demand because tax lawyers are part of every single transaction. Anytime a company buys another company, divests another company. So tax lawyers are always in demand as well. So that's something that you could definitely look into and you would find good opportunities there. That's not to say that there are not opportunities in others, just those, that's my opinion. So this is kind of more detail on what we were talking about before, different career paths that you can pursue with a law degree. We talked about investment banking. Big Four is kind of like that as well, the accounting. They're going to want to see some kind of financial ability. New law is a bit like what I was talking about with legal tech. You know, companies that are in the legal industry but aren't necessarily law firms. Commercial law, those are big private law firms that are international in scope. Management consulting, we talked about. Nonprofits, we talked about. Social justice, those are the types of organizations that are trying to make an impact. As I said, those jobs are fewer and further in between. They're harder to get. And then, of course, the government.
Cool. Thanks very much, Shaunna. And just as you know, many of the international students would possibly come to the United States for the LLM study. That might be a little bit easier for them to start with. But do you see any like a different type of career paths or anything that they need to pay attention in terms of planning?
Yes. So for LLM students, the one thing I will say about private law firms, I have had friends who have LLMs, were foreign qualified lawyers and worked in private law firms. However, your private law firm has to sponsor you. And right now, I would say that private law firms are not as eager to sponsor lawyers to work in the US because they have so much talent here. We have a lot of US lawyers that, you know, so there's maybe not as much of a need. However, that does not mean that you cannot find an opportunity in a US-based firm. There are two different paths that I think make a lot of sense. The first is you can go for a big international law firm that perhaps has an office where you are qualified. You can work in that office for a year or two, demonstrate your expertise and that you're a great employee, and then you can ask to do an exchange to the US, maybe to the New York office for a year or so. That happens in many different law firms. At my old law firm, we had foreign lawyers that would come. They'd work for 6 to 12 months. And it's a good way to demonstrate to a firm that, yes, they should sponsor you. The other thing is there are other options out there, as we just went through, where they're not necessarily so focused on the JD, particularly if you have specialized skills that they want. So if we're talking about the environment, for instance, you can work for a company that might be focused on renewable energy. Their main clients may be in China. So they need to understand the legal regime there, and they would be thrilled to have someone who understood the legal regime in China and also had a year's worth of study here in the US. Like, that would be a wonderful pairing. And there are other opportunities like that out there. So you have to think about which are the types of companies or firms that may have a lot of partners or a lot of clients where I have my underlying degree. And that's where you should focus your search. And there's also opportunities outside of that. For instance, you can work in the justice system where you don't necessarily need to have a JD. You could be a social worker. You could work in the probation system. You might work for a nonprofit, but not necessarily going to court every day. So I think the idea is to be very diligent, think outside of the box, as they say, and think about who wants your specific skills. It's not really about competing apples to apples with US individuals that have JDs. It's about finding out the advantages you have and selling those, because I don't know anything about Chinese environmental law. So that's what someone needs to know. They don't want me. They might want you.
That is great. 刚刚Shaunna跟我们非常全面的介绍了进入法律行业相关的这个职业机会，你可以从哪些方面去思考和探索。而且他也提到了非常重要的一点，真的很值得大家去体会，然后很好的去贯彻。那就是你在寻找这个职位的时候，一定要是扬长避短，去找到自己的优势和到底在业界里面哪一些企业、哪一些领域会需要你所有的优势和独特的这个背景，那这就是你进入的最好的一个 sweet spot. So Shaunna, let's maybe get more tactical. And could you share with us, if I want to find a job, what would be the action or the thinking process I would take?
So think of it as a funnel, right? You want to take the area that you are most interested in and then kind of drill down to where you want to focus that area. So in these two examples, both individuals are interested in intellectual property, which is copyrights, patents, etc. But that's a big field. And it's a field, as we talked about, every company on the face of the planet needs. This first individual says, you know what, I'm really interested in music or film. They know they want to work in the entertainment industry. And sometimes when you don't know exactly what you want to do, thinking about the types of things you enjoy doing when you're not studying help, right? Like if you love to read, you might be like, well, I want to work in the publishing industry. If you spend all of your free time at the movies, you're like, I'm really interested in the entertainment industry. And actually, I think everybody should do what they are passionate about because you're much more likely to be good at it. So this first individual, they say, I want to work in the entertainment industry. And, you know, I like the idea of working at a law firm, working for a lot of different clients. And so I'm going to work for a law firm. And then they go in there and they say, okay, I'm going to try. In a law firm, you might not always get just the work you want, right? Because there are a lot of different clients. So they said, I'm going to try to work for music publishers. And so they go to a partner that works for music publishers, let's say work for Sony Publishing, which is the biggest music publisher on the planet, I believe. And they start working on different issues, copyright, licensing of music, etc. Now they could find 8 years from now, they actually go to work for that music publisher because they have expertise, but that's how they gain the expertise. But let's go to the other individual. They started out in the same place, right here in the funnel, intellectual property. This person might have done their undergraduate degree in life sciences or biomedical engineering, right? They really, really love healthcare type issues. They know that they want to do just that. They don't want to take the chance of going to a law firm and also having to work on a mergers or an acquisition. They're going to go to a corporation. They're going to go to a biotech company. And that person may spend their day filing patents, dealing with scientists, understanding the technology, and then even defending those patents in patent litigation. So as you can see, you can start with the same type of basis. You can even be taking the same types of classes in law school. However, it could lead you to very different career paths. But I think the most important thing is at the very first level, figure out what you're passionate about, what type of issue, and also what type of environment you want to work in. Because a law firm and a corporation are two very different types of environments, and you have to be very aware and honest of what your strengths are and the environments in which you work best. And if I can give you any advice, I will say, know who you are and how you do your best work. And that will really be helpful for you in charting your career path. So on this slide, I think we wanted to talk about where you can find opportunities in different industries. So we've listed the top paying states, and remember these are averages. That doesn't mean that every job in these locations is going to pay more than any other location, as well as the states in which there are a lot of job opportunities. And you'll note that like New York and California, District of Columbia are on both lists, which is something to consider. It means they've got well-paying jobs and they've got a lot of jobs. And you can certainly focus your job search in these areas. However, I want to say, just like there's every rule, there's an exception. There may be reasons to not focus your job search in these areas. For instance, we talked about how there are some places where you might have gone to school there. It's a very regional school. Your network may be better if you are looking for a job around where you just graduated from school. Also, California, New York, DC, one of the reasons why they're very well paying is because the cost of living is very high. So it may be that you want to focus your job search in states where the cost of living is not as high. Places like North Carolina, some places in the Midwest. Now, the opportunities there may not be as many opportunities there, but there still may be a lot. For instance, I'm thinking about a state like Minnesota. Believe it or not, there are tons of companies that are headquartered in Minnesota, huge companies. Companies like Target. Target has a ton of lawyers. And so I just would say, don't be so wed to only looking in the green and the red and the purple states, particularly if you want to work for a company. Biggest company on the planet, Walmart, based in Arkansas, which is not on either one of these lists. So just do your research. This is a guide, but it's only a guide, like everything.
Right. Thank you very much for that. And let's talk a little bit more about the skills and credentials that a employer might be looking for graduates.
So think of it like two things. One of it is the piece of paper, right? What you can demonstrate on your resume. The other is what you can demonstrate by who you are and what you've achieved. Every employer is going to be looking for that college degree from a good school with a good resume, strong coursework, right? They want to make sure that you didn't just take all easy classes and that's why you have a 3.8. You know, they want to make sure that you actually had a little bit of rigor in your college schedule. They want you to have a strong understanding of several legal practices. Every law school and every LLM program is going to make you take different classes. So I wouldn't even worry so much about that. That will just happen naturally. Ideally, you'll have had some coursework that would have allowed you to have hands-on experience. They're called clinics in US law school, and that means you may have your own clients that you deal with under the supervision of a professor, of course. Internships we talked about, and that's internships in the law, outside of the law, whatever you can get. We just want to make sure you've been spending your off time productively. And then also in those interviews, you have to be able to explain why you want to be a lawyer, why you want to practice law, why you want to work for the company, why you want to work for the legal tech company. Always have a reason and make sure that it is compelling to the employer and fits into what they do. So the worst thing in the world would be to go into a corporation and say, I want to be a lawyer because I want to work with a lot of different clients. Well, this is just one client. You know, you have to make sure your story makes sense, and it has to be tailored for each employer. So in terms of skills, they want to know that you have business sense. So you may recall that I said I wanted employers to see that I had worked for different businesses, so I understood what's important to a business. That's what it means. It's not just about the law. The law has to marry with the business goal. And so they want to understand that, they want to see that you understand strategy. Definitely strong oral and written communication skills. Lawyers write all day long. They talk all day long. If you don't like to talk and you don't like to write, you don't want to be a lawyer. I'm sorry to say it. That's just it. Incredible attention to detail. So that means that every piece of correspondence to an employer, even for an internship, should be proofread, flawlessly written. You know, these things are important, and they note that if you have a typo in your letter about an internship, they're probably not going to want you to be their lawyer because you might have a typo in a contract and a typo that costs them money. Excellent time management skills. It's just the case lawyers work a lot. You have a lot on your plate, so they want to know that you are able to manage your own time. We talked about academic ability, resilience, and self-confidence. Sometimes being a lawyer requires you to be in opposition to others. Even when you're negotiating a contract, they want to know that you can be professional, however, that you can stand your ground, and that if a counterpart says, no, I'm not going to agree to that term, you're not going to fold. You're going to be able to explain why they should, and you're going to be resilient even when things are not always going your way. And that's not something you can demonstrate on a resume. That's something that you're going to be able to demonstrate in an interview by telling life stories, you know, about the life skills and the challenges you've overcome. And then we talked about research and analytical skills. If you don't like to look things up, you probably shouldn't be a lawyer. All right. So we've talked a little bit about this, but we can delve a little bit deeper. And this is the decision tree, where you want to begin your career after graduation. There's the law focused, which, as I mentioned, is by far more common, and the industry focus. If you're going the law focus, you're going to be a practicing lawyer. If you go into a private law firm, extensive firm resources, right? They pay well, they charge a lot. That means they can spend a lot of money on training, having up-to-date like legal research, all of the things that you need to kind of make your job go smoother. You'll likely have a legal library that can help you look up things. You may have an assistant that can help you type 100-page briefs, you know, just a lot of resources to work with. That's not the same in the government or as a judicial law clerk. However, in all three of those, you'll work with very well-credentialed colleagues. You are going to be working with some of the smartest people on the planet. That is great because they can teach you, they can guide you. It can sometimes, however, be intimidating. You might be sitting around the table with people who you feel have better credentials than you, maybe understand the issues better than you. That is not necessarily the case. I think everyone has to bring their own confidence to the table and understand that their point of view matters. you were brought into the organization for a reason, so don't let that intimidate you at all. As I mentioned before, you will be working on a lot of different types of matters and cases at once, right? So if you were in a law firm, you might be working on one merger. You might also be working on a company that is selling a subsidiary. And then you could also be working with a company that's in litigation because a transaction went bad. And you have to be able to juggle all of that work. And all of it could be going on and be very intense at the same time. And then also, at least when it comes to private law firms, that can be higher paying. Not as much as I mentioned for the corporate agency or the judicial clerkship, but it can be more lucrative. But let's say you don't want to practice law every day. Let's say you wanted the legal degree, you wanted a JD or an LLM, but you want to use it to do something else. So you can go more for the industry focus, the Big Four, management consulting, investment banking. This gives your resume, I would say, more depth. You have the opportunity to develop a lot of different skills because now you've got the legal knowledge and you also may have, for instance, the financial knowledge, and you can bring something additional that your colleagues don't have. If you go to work at a law firm, everyone has a law degree. If you go work at a consulting firm, not everyone has a law degree. So that can make you stand out. Having that on your resume may also give you greater flexibility in the future for different career paths. So for instance, if you go to law school, you work in a law firm for 20 years, it may not be as available for you to become the chief operating officer of a startup. However, if you go to law school, then you go to management consulting, it may be more accessible for you to become the chief operating officer of a startup. So that's something to keep in mind. If you can, think about what you might want to do even 15 years from now. I'm not saying that you always can forecast that, but if you don't see yourself necessarily practicing law 15 years from now, that may be a clue that you should consider not only legal jobs after getting a law degree or an LLM, but also industry jobs, because it may just give you more flexibility in the future.
That makes a lot of sense, Shaunna. Thank you. As we talked about, entering the field of law might be one of the most challenging starting points for students. And for international students, it might be even harder. They face visa issues and financial barriers, language barriers, or they don't necessarily know how to take the step-by-step planning to get to where they want. So could you just share with us a little bit more the suggestions for international students?
Absolutely. So the first thing, and we alluded to it earlier, is you have to be able, if you want to practice law in a state, you have to be admitted to what they call a bar, which is a fancy word for the group. In order to get admitted to the bar, you have to take the bar exam. Not every state will allow you to take the bar if you just have an LLM. Thankfully, New York and California, two big jurisdictions, will allow you to take it. However, and also if you're a foreign qualified lawyer, but the bars themselves, the governing bodies, have to review your degree and grant you that permission. So that's just another obstacle that you have to keep in mind. And you want to do your research and make sure that you are going through it step by step. Every bar, however, every group, they have hotlines and you can call them and they'll walk you through the process. So they're not trying to be intimidating. You can get assistance in navigating the system, but it is not as simple as just signing up for the test and taking it. So that's one thing. And I would encourage everyone, if they think they want to take the bar exam for a particular state, start doing that work now. The bar exam is very, very difficult, and not everyone passes on the first try. So it's something that you should consider when you're charting out your career path. And make sure that you also have some backup options. For instance, if it doesn't work out, like if you were going to get an LLM, and you want to take the bar exam, but let's say it doesn't work out, you're not authorized to take the exam, or you don't do so well your first time, think about if there's something you might want to do other than practice law. Like, would you like to go and work for a legal tech company? Or is there a management consulting firm that works with the types of clients that would be intriguing to you? The other issue that we talked about, or the other option we talked about, is working for a big firm like a Norton Rose Fulbright or a Clifford Chance that has offices all over the world, and starting at a non-US branch office where your degree qualifies you to practice, and then after you've demonstrated your value to the firm, transferring to another office in the US. Now that transfer may be temporary, but you can figure out if you even like practicing in the US. And that may give you enough time to then, after you have some experience under your belt, look for other options, whether it's in the firm or even outside of the firm. So that is something that I've seen happen with great success. And actually, just so you know, US lawyers do it the other way as well. I have a friend who is actually, he's a Puerto Rican guy from New York, and he runs his firm's Paris office. He moved there after he had been practicing in the US for 5 years, became fluent in French, and now they let him practice in Paris. So there are different options. So don't get discouraged just if your first job isn't exactly where you want it to be. And then the last option is thinking about a career that will allow you maximum flexibility to work for clients that are based all over the world. And that would be like an international law focused career. In order to do that successfully, however, focus on fields that are not so dependent on jurisdiction specific law. So for instance, it's unlikely that knowledge of, I'll call it Indian criminal law would be needed in Florida. You know, it's unlikely to come up. However, a company in Florida could very well need to know about, Indian shipping law. They may have freighters that go through that area all the time. So you have to think about different types of law that are going to be more applicable to larger businesses and issues that are going to come up that will cross borders. So usually not litigation, usually not criminal law is what I would say. Business law, most likely.
Thanks so very much, Shaunna. 那像 Shaunna 这样子这么资深的导师，我们能够请到他来给我们全面的去解析这个法律方面的这个进入行业的方式是非常非常难得的。我们等一下还有一点点时间可以再留给大家，可以大家现在把问题呢都提到我们的这个群里面，或者在在我们的这个在线平台上面去提问题。If anybody has questions, please you can type online or send it to our WeChat group. 然后呢，也给大家简单的介绍一下我们的这个 JobUpper 的导师的领航计划。在这个领航计划里面，我们现在已经有接近30位像 Shaunna 这样子资深的，在自己的行业里面有非常建树的导师他们愿意花他们自己的宝贵的时间来跟同学们针对你自己的需求去 one-on-one 的去做一个3个月的一个导师的项目。那这个项目呢，会包含每2周1次的专题的交流，会从职业发展、职业规划、你的积累，甚至到学业和事业的平衡，以及你怎么样去选择自己的这个未来的再继续进修的专业等等，你的问题去持续的沟通。那同时呢，也会在这3个月的时间里面，导师根据你的需求和他的专长去做一个行业的一个实践项目，来支持到你的履历和发展。如果优秀的导师还会给你提供一个推荐信和内部的一些推荐的机会。那么我们呢，希望在这个整个的12周的时间里面，像在这里展示的会有不同的这个发展的这个路径和话题，每一次来跟你具体的去讨论。那么希望在你 完成这个项目计划的时候，以及配合我们很多其他的实习指导的这个指引，你在美国呢能够有确切的企业的实习经历，有力的导师的推荐信，然后呢能够有准确的认知和软硬实力的这种积累，以及有导师和各种计划当中为你去不断的去拓展的这个人脉的关系。那你可以在美国有一个非常好的一个职业开启。Okay, so I do have a few questions
Okay.
that the students have for you. So one of the questions wants to ask about the ever-changing industry. Because we all know under the, this is very high level. So under the fourth industrial revolution, you have mentioned about the legal tech field that we might be able to enter. And
Yes.
Do you see any changes in this industry or your practice, and what are the tips for the students to pay attention to?
Absolutely. There are going to be, just as the fourth industrial revolution, AI, machine learning is changing every industry, it is changing the legal industry. The changes just haven't happened as quickly as they have in other areas, which, I'm sorry, hold on one moment. So I would encourage every student to ensure that they know as much about technology as possible, because the legal industry, just like other industries, is going to become more technology dependent. That means things like most of your litigation management is going to happen online. More of your clients are going to require that you be able to understand the technological aspects of their business, and that you're able to put and bring your legal knowledge to that. The other thing is technology is opening up new fields of law, which younger people are going to have more of an advantage in, because older people simply haven't been practicing it. It's new to everybody. So someone 20 years your senior doesn't necessarily have an advantage. One of those areas is data privacy. It's a huge legal area, and it's only going to become bigger. That's the issue of like how Google can store your information. And the EU, as we know, just passed a very comprehensive law about how you're supposed to store data, who can store the data, etc. Becoming an expert in something like that will make you attractive to employers. And there's going to be new legal statutes like that are always coming up. So that's a great question. The other thing that the fourth industrial revolution is going to do to the legal industry is it's going to make it a lot easier to have machines or lawyers in lower paying jurisdictions do some of the, I hate to say it, but like grunt work of a litigation. So having machines scan documents to see if they should be turned over in a litigation, as opposed to a junior lawyer. That's going to have two effects. One, it means that there's going to be less jobs for junior lawyers doing that type of work. So you should consider what you can do to make yourself more attractive. It also means that there might be more job opportunities in lower paying jurisdictions than there are in the US. Companies no longer want to pay really, really high billable hourly rates for US lawyers to read a document if they can get a lawyer, a good lawyer in India, to read the same document overnight, load it up into the cloud, and the client can see it at the same time they would have if the US lawyer had done so. The legal industry, it's not going to be immune from all of those changes. But there are ways to take advantage of them, as I mentioned.
Great, thank you. And the second question that the student asks is about paralegal. We often hear about this word, and the student wants to know, he or she has already got a MBA, which is non-law related. Can they actually go take a certificate course or other passes so that they would be able to be?
Mom, I'm still doing my webinar.
You must be hungry now.
Yes. So you can take a certificate course. However, I would not say I recommend it. And here's the reason why. Many large law firms hire paralegals, or they may call them legal assistants, and they don't require them to have a legal assistant degree. They require that they have an undergraduate degree, that they have analytical skills, that they be committed to the work, but not necessarily that they have a paralegal certificate. There are a lot of programs out there who are selling paralegal certificates. Well, they're advertising programs for paralegal certificates. You may also come across a legal secretary certificate. It doesn't really increase your attractiveness to an employer in the US, and it may cost you money that it doesn't make sense to spend, that you're not going to recoup. I would say if you have an MBA, you are more than qualified to be a paralegal or a legal assistant. And it's really about demonstrating that you've been working successfully, or you've had internships, or you have the right, skills based on your coursework, and that's what you should focus on. I would not advise going to get a paralegal certificate at all.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for the advice.
Mm-hmm.
And the last question I got here is from a student who has recently graduated. So during her undergraduate, she didn't have any internship experience.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, she has to apply for graduate school. So what would your advice to be for her to better prepare herself, and how should she go about LLM or JD route?
Absolutely. So there's still every reason to be optimistic. Do not despair, because I would bet you, even though if you hadn't had formal internships, you still have work experience. You have to think of work experience more broadly. So if you've been working in a family business, for instance, that should go on your resume, because I'm sure there were valuable skills. If you worked at a store, or if you worked in a restaurant, you probably have knowledge of skills that are transferable. You have knowledge of managing people. You have knowledge of client service, which is huge for lawyers. You have knowledge of inventory management. You understand how a business works. I would think about everything that you've kind of done over your life and put it down on paper. Also, if you have extracurriculars, like if you've been involved in a community organization, and you take on responsibility with that organization. If you've been involved in your church and you run a fundraiser at your church, these are all skills, life skills, and experience that count for something. And you should definitely put it down. It's not as if, people are only hiring people that have internships. The other thing is, it's still maybe not too late if you haven't applied. You should call up a professor whose class you might have done well in, ask them if they want a research assistant. And that can be done, the good thing is, remotely. You don't even have to be sitting in the same place, because all of the work could be done over the computer and you could connect via phone. And if you have the ability to take an unpaid job, it's possible that you could still get an unpaid internship. Everybody likes free help. That's kind of a rule. So there's still a lot of different ways that you can make yourself look attractive to a graduate school, and also that you can still get more experience during the application process.
Well, thank you so very much, Shaunna. Every experience that you have shared is really priceless for the students. And thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, and I apologize for the background noise. I really appreciated my time.
Your whole family, and go for a dinner and enjoy the holiday season.
Thank you, and I enjoyed it as well. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.